Okay, so now we go on to apostrophes. So these are the rules for apostrophes. You use apostrophes to show possession. So when instead of saying the shoes of the boy, you say the boy's shoes. Instead of saying the meow of the cat, you say the cat's meow. Marla's painting. And then so these are singular. So it's just one boy, one cat, one Marla. But these are examples of how you use apostrophe when it is a plural word. So since there's 4 cats, it's not just one cat. Since it's 4 cats, it ends with an S, you just put an apostrophe, just an apostrophe. So it's the word cats, right? Instead of doing apostrophe S, you just do just the apostrophe because it already ends with an S. Here we have the brother's room. So it's multiple brothers, right? You could have brothers like this, and you could have brothers like that. So the difference is that that one means one brother. It's the possession of one brother. This one is the possession of multiple brothers. So that one's plural. So then we have the 4 cats' toys, the brothers' room, the parents' bed. So again, multiple parents, not just one. So when it's singular, you just do apostrophe S. When it's plural and the word ends in S, you do the ending of the S and then just an apostrophe. You don't have to do another apostrophe. You don't have to do another S. You don't have to do apostrophe S. You just do S apostrophe. So then you also use apostrophes for contractions. So instead of saying are not, you say aren't. Instead of saying instead of saying should not, you say shouldn't. Instead of saying have not, you say haven't, etc. You also add an apostrophe to form the plural of single letters and numbers. So to form the plural of single letters and single numbers. So you have this example right here. Did you not dot your I's and cross your T's? So it's just one I, it's just a single letter and a single letter right there. So you use apostrophes to say multiple, right? So you wrote multiple I's, so it's asking, did you dot your I's and you crossed your T's? Here's another example. There are a total of 4 7s in my phone number. So it's just a single number. If there's a total of 4 75s, then you would just do that. You would not put an apostrophe because that's 2 numbers together. This is a single number by itself, so you use an apostrophe. Semicolons. So now we go on to the rules for semicolons. You use a semicolon to join 2 complete and closely related sentences. So those are the 2 requirements. It has to be complete sentences, 2 complete sentences, and it has to be 2 sentences that are closely related. If it's 2 sentences that they might be complete, but they are completely unrelated with each other, you do not use a semicolon. So here are examples of a right way to write a sentence. I currently live in San Jacinto, California, semicolon. Although I have lived here for about 6 years, I was born and raised in Costa Rica, and I will forever primarily consider myself Costa Rican. So here we have 2 complete sentences. This is one complete sentence right here, one complete thought. And this is another complete thought. So you have 2 complete sentences. They are related, so we can use a semicolon. We can separate them with a semicolon, or we can separate them with a period. The thing about a semicolon is it just shows relationship. So they would never in the SAT, since both of these are right, they would not give you a choice where both of them are right. If they give you a choice where both of them are right, you're probably not reading something correctly. Maybe the sentences are not closely related, so it wouldn't be a semicolon, right? Or maybe the sentences are too closely related that a period would seem too abrupt. You need a semicolon. So in the SAT, they would never give you one where the both of them are a choice, because that would not make sense. If there is, then that means you have to think harder. Think about the specifics of why you use a semicolon and the specifics of why you would use a period. And then here's an example of a wrong way to write this sentence. I currently live in San Jacinto, California, although I have lived here for about 6 years. I was born and raised in Costa Rica, and I will forever primarily consider myself Costa Rican. That is wrong because we have 2 complete thoughts right here. You have 2 complete thoughts right here. The red is one complete thought and the blue is one complete thought. And you cannot separate 2 complete thoughts with a comma because it just seems way too long. It's a run-on sentence. it doesn't make sense because there's two complete thoughts that have to be separated. Here are some other examples of how you use that rule. I don't understand the directions. That's one complete sentence, semicolon. My teacher must explain them to me. So these are related. Because I don't understand the directions, my teacher must explain the directions to me. They're related, they're complete thoughts, you can use a semicolon. My brother seems short compared to his friends. Nevertheless, he is the tallest person in our family. So it just has to do with it. She's saying that he seems short, but he is the tallest person in our family. They're related thoughts, and they're complete sentences. You can use a semicolon. Jessica is interested in taking the class. However, it does not fit in her schedule. So because it doesn't fit in even though she's interested in taking the class, it doesn't fit in her schedule. Related thoughts, complete thoughts, you can use a semicolon. Next rule for semicolons. Use a semicolon to separate items in a list where at least one item contains a comma. A list where at least one item contains a comma. So remember, when you do a list, you have item, and then you have a comma, and then you have another item, and then you have a comma, and then you have another item, and then let's say sorry, I wrote that wrong, and then you have another item, and then you put a period, right? Or you would have an and then you put a period. So that's what it means. So it's saying that this item has a comma in it. Remember, to make a list, it doesn't have to be single words. It doesn't have to be like apples. It could be red apples. That's 2 words. It could be red apples and sweet oranges. That's still a list. It's a list of fruits, right? It's just that the item in the list happens to be more than 1 word. So don't get confused. Don't think that it's not a list just because it's not 1 word. A list can have, the items on a list can be a whole phrase. It could be a whole sentence even. So here are some examples about how to use that. She had already lived in Independence, Kentucky, semicolon, Minneapolis, Minnesota, semicolon, and New York City, New York. So the items in this list are cities. And you notice that the items have a comma in it, just like the requirement says. It says use a semicolon to separate items in a list where at least one item contains a comma. You can see that each item here contains a comma. The reason we do this is because if we put a comma here to separate the items, as we know that you're supposed to separate items with a comma, then if we did that, it would be like comma, 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 too many commas, way too many commas, and then you would be confused. You'd be like, well, is Independence in Kentucky, or is Kentucky in Minneapolis, or is Minneapolis in Minnesota, or is Minnesota in New York? Because they're just separated by commas. But here, we can see the individual list items. We can see this is one item, this is one item, and this is one item. So that's why we use semicolon instead of a comma. The next one is another example. The items in the bakery window look delicious. Soft, buttery croissants, warm, flaky scones, decadent, gorgeous cakes, and delicate artisanal chocolates. So the items in this list is basically desserts, and it's just the item includes a description of the dessert. So it's soft and buttery croissants, warm and flaky scones. So it just happens to be that the items have commas in it. You use the comma because they're descriptive adjectives without an and in the middle, so you separate them with a comma. So again, we can't separate them with commas here because there would just be way too many commas and it'd be confusing what is describing what. So we use semicolons to make it more organized. The art museum contained some beautiful classically designed furniture, bronze, plaster, and marble statues, and colorful abstract modern art pieces. So the items in that list are just, descriptions of what the art museum has. Each item in the list has a comma in it. So therefore, we have to use semicolons to separate each item in the list because otherwise it would be confusing. Otherwise, it would be unorganized. My first meal at college consisted of cold, dry toast, runny undercooked eggs, and a very strong acidic coffee. So those are the items in the list. Since each item has a comma in it, we need to separate the items in the list with semicolons. And now we get to learn about colons. So you use a colon before a list if the information before the list is a complete sentence. So if if you have a list and the part before it isn't a complete sentence, you do not use a colon. So here's an example. I went to Stater Bros and bought a lot of things. Chicken, rice, ice cream, yogurt, heavy cream, and chocolate. The blue over here is our list, and then the red is a complete sentence. I could say that by itself. I could say, I went to Stater Bros and bought a lot of things. I could just say that. But I want to be more specific, so I can use a colon and list the specific things I bought. The colons are usually used, they're mostly used to specify, to give us specific information, to specify what you mean when you say you bought a lot of things. What do you mean? What things? So that's what colon is really for. You also use a colon after an independent clause that is followed by information that directly modifies, exemplifies, or adds to the clause. So you use a colon after an independent clause that is followed by information that directly modifies, exemplifies, or adds to the clause. So here are some examples. Shen encountered a problem that he had not anticipated. A broken internet link. So a broken internet link is a phrase, right? It's a clause. A broken internet link is a clause because I cannot say it by itself. I can't just tell you a broken internet link. That would not make sense. So that is a clause. The part before it, the part in red, this part is a complete sentence. It's an independent clause. And it says here, Shen encountered a problem. Well, what problem? So since we're specifying, you could put a colon in it. And if you are smart and you know your comma rules, you know that you can also put a comma there. Because this is really an apostrophe, and apostrophe is something that describes a noun. So here it's describing problems. So what problem? A broken internet link. So you could use a colon to separate that, or you could use a comma, but this is a way that you can use a colon. The next one is another example. A whale is not a fish. It is a warm-blooded mammal. In this case, they're both complete sentences, but it is a warm-blooded mammal. Is this kind of exemplifying, or it's adding to the previous clause. A whale is not a fish. Well, what is it? It is a warm-blooded mammal. It's just adding to it, adding more information. The next one is another example. My sister suggested a great location. The park down the street from our house. The park down the street from our house is just a clause. If I just told you the park down the street from our house, that would not make sense. So it's just a clause. It is not a complete sentence. The part before it is a complete sentence. My sister suggested a great location. That is an independent clause. And we have here this modifying clause. And remember, it has to modify the independent clause before it. And it's modifying the word location. It's just saying what location? The park down the street from our house. So again, you could use a comma, as you might remember, but you can also use a colon. That's another way to write a sentence like this. And a tip, when it comes to writing essays and stuff like that, it makes you seem really smart when you use colons, because not a lot of people know the rules for colons. The next one, another example. I have a very painful, inconvenient disease. Fibromyalgia. If fibromyalgia is just a word, it is not a complete sentence. And then I have a very painful, inconvenient disease is an incomplete clause. So this part is modifying disease. So what disease? Fibromyalgia. So it's a clause that it's modifying the previous independent clause. So you can put a semicolon to separate that. A colon. You can use a colon to separate that idea. Now finally, we go into dashes and parentheses. Dashes and parentheses are used very commonly, very similar to how commas are used. You can either use dashes, or you can use commas, or you can use parentheses. It's really your choice. And again, sometimes when you use all of them in an essay, it makes you seem really smart because you know your grammar rules. So parentheses. You can use parentheses to set off parenthetical clauses in the middle of a sentence. And as you might remember, you can use commas to set off parenthetical clauses in the middle of a sentence. But you can also use parentheses. And as you know, they're called parenthetical clauses. You can use parentheses. Alan visited the Football Hall of Fame on a guided tour during his summer vacation. You can see that it's a parenthetical clause because it's kind of just thrown in there. It messes up the flow of your sentence. It's right in the middle. And it's just kind of extra information. You don't need to know it, but It's there, so you can put parentheses around it or commas, but it's an example of how you use parentheses. Now, dashes, that's the only really way you use parentheses. Dashes has a couple more uses. Dashes indicate an abrupt change in thought and signal the inclusion of an explanation or an afterthought. I really like the word afterthought because I don't know about you, but personally, my mind is very scattered. So if I'm thinking something, I'm not always thinking in complete thoughts. You're kind of thinking a whole sentence and then all of a sudden a thought comes in and interrupts that sentence. That's kind of how it is. It's just something that's thrown in there that interrupts the sentence. But it is an explanation. It is it's not just random. It's not just like the dog was walking and there was a squirrel over there. It's not like that. It's relevant. But it is kind of just thrown in there, just interrupting the sentence. So here's an example. Dr. Baikara, a noted scientist and educator, spoke at our commencement ceremony. You can see that this part right here, it kind of interrupts the flow of the sentence, but it is kind of important. It's not necessarily important. You could take it out and the sentence would be fine, but it gives extra explanation to who Dr. Baikara is. So you use dashes around that. As you might remember, you can also use commas, but you can also use dashes. This is an example of how you can use dashes. The coyotes yipping, a harsh guttural sound, could be heard throughout the valley that night. And you can see this kind of just interrupts your sentence. It's just thrown in there. So you can use dashes on each side like that because it's in the middle of the sentence to just set it off. After the terrible storm, a gorgeous rainbow lit up the sky. A sign, I hoped, of better things to come. In this case, since the kind of the interrupting clause is at the very end and it ends with a period, you only have to use one dash to separate it from the previous clause. But yeah, so that part, a sign, I hoped, of better things to come, that is a clause. It doesn't sound good by itself. It's just kind of thrown in there in the end of the sentence. So we can set it off with a dash. And that would be the end of the slideshow. So I hope you know your grammar now, and I hope that was you could understand that. And then the next video you should watch should be the one where I go over a practice test of writing, and then we can try to answer the questions using our new knowledge of grammar.